is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories.
Final act of desperate cowardice. He, with no regard to the lives of his own family or others in the building, he chose to blow himself up.
The Islamic State group's leader is dead after a United States Special Forces raid in Syria.
Our other headlines, a cost of living crisis and soaring energy bills. Now the Bank of England raises interest rates as the UK government intervenes to offset record price hikes.
Facebook loses friends. Social media giant sees its shares plunge over 20% in a single day, one of the biggest drops in the stock's history.
And how much is that tiger in the window? Retailers hope to cash in buying presents to mark Chinese New Year. The United States says the leader of the Islamic State group has been killed during a raid by American special forces in Syria.
President Joe Biden says Abu Ibrahim al-Hashemi al-Qureshi blew himself up when surrounded, putting the blame on the dead man for the civilian casualties of the raid. Rescuers at the scene in Idlib province say at least 13 people, including 6 children, were killed.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Caroline Malone in Washington. Caroline, details still somewhat sketchy. What more do we know?
Absolutely. Well, we have just heard from Biden in the last hour, and he said that this US military conducted a counter-terrorism operation, which, as they call it, successfully removed a major terror threat to the world. That, of course, is Abu Ibrahim al-Hashemi al-Qureshi, the leader of ISIS, who's also known as Hashemi Abdullah. And Biden has said that they actually chose a special forces operation in this case in order to minimize civilian casualties, but that was difficult because this ISIS leader lived in a residential area and was surrounded by people, but that in the end he actually self-detonated a suicide vest and killed himself and others during the operation, including members of his own family. Let's have a listen to more of what Biden said on that.
Our team is still compiling the report, but we do know that as our troops approach to capture the terrorist, in a final act of desperate cowardness, he, with no regard to the lives of his own family or others in the building, he chose to blow himself up, not just to the vest, but to blow up that 3rd floor, rather than face justice for the crimes he has committed, taking several members of his family with him, just as his predecessor did.
So Hashemi Abdullah had actually led ISIS since 2019, and that was when the former leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was actually killed also in a US raid. And he had ruled over what they called the self-declared caliphate, which controlled parts of Syria and Iraq. Hashemi Abdullah had remained, however, largely in the shadows, and he didn't leave this complex where the operation happened much, instead working through couriers. But ISIS had been carrying out continued attacks in Iraq and Syria in recent years.
And what is the significance of the timing of this operation by Special Forces?
Well, in a background call from senior administration officials that I listened to, I heard actually that this operation was in preparation for months and that Biden was actually aware of it as long as a month ago and obviously gave the go-ahead for it. And part of the planning was to make sure that if someone did in fact blow themselves up inside this building, inside this complex, it was strong enough not to collapse and cause excess amount of civilian casualties. And as we heard, of course, what happened was that Hashemi did blow himself up, causing a number of deaths, including of women and children. Syrian rescue forces saying 13 people were killed, including 6 children and at least 4 women. It's not clear which can be attributed to the bomb and actually to fighting that did happen after that. But the US military right now is under scrutiny because of a high-profile drone strike that happened in Afghanistan last year. The Pentagon at the time described it as a success, but which afterwards, it turned out, did kill a number of civilians, which has put them under scrutiny. And, of course, this week, there's been a big diplomatic push with Russia. Russia has been bringing forces to the Ukrainian border, and the US has said now that it's going to be putting some more forces to NATO allies in Europe. Russia, of course, has forces as well in Syria. It's been allied to President Bashir for many years, although this particular operation to kill the ISIS leader actually happened in rebel-held areas near the Turkish border. You know, US were very clear today, and the president was very clear today to say that this was a group that still continues to be a threat, both to the US and to allies around the world, and this has stopped the threat.
Caroline, American politics is particularly divisive at the moment. It's early days, I admit, early hours into this, but do you sense that this operation will get cross-party support?
As you say, it is hard to say at the moment. Certainly there is cross-party support for doing what can be done to protect American people in the US and abroad. And certainly ISIS is most definitely seen as a terror threat across the divide, across both Republicans and Democrats. It's been a difficult time for President Biden in general. He's had a number of challenges to his leadership, and his popularity is actually quite a bit down at the moment. We're, of course, leading into midterms later this year in November. So it is an important time for Biden to be able to do things that do bring both members and both parties together at this time. But certainly we'll see how that plays out with the different politicians from the different groups in the coming days.
Caroline, as you suggest, Joe Biden is sometimes depicted as being a rather dithery commander-in-chief. I wonder if this operation will do something for his ratings and that perception, whether it is fair or not.
There's a possibility it might too. I mean, Biden, was very strong in his wording today to say that this operation successfully removed a major terror threat to the world. So he's not just talking, in fact, about the US, he's talking about US allies as well. And as we talked about, this has come at a very important time when the US has continued to show its support for its NATO allies by deciding to send a number of troops to Europe to, shore up support, really, against what people see as a threat from Russia around Ukraine. Russia, of course, building up those troops around Ukraine in the last few weeks and months. So there is a big diplomatic push happening on a number of fronts right now for Biden, and this is just another major big event that's been happening that he's handling at the moment.
Caroline Malone in Washington for the moment. Thank you very much, and we hope to take you to Damascus later in the programme.
A cost of living crisis. Inflation expected to hit 7%, and now the Bank of England raises interest rates to try and tackle soaring inflation. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank says interest rates remain on hold.
Two radically different approaches to reset global economies. Our correspondent Juliet Mann has been crunching the numbers.
Thanks, Jamie. It's so radically different, it's unbelievable. But let's start with the Eurozone, where, zut alors, inflation has surged to a record high. But the ECB is not raising the cost of borrowing. Well, not yet. Analysts are betting on a couple of interest rate moves this year. For now, no change. Now, if the pressure's on the boss of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she isn't showing it.
Inflation has risen sharply in recent months, and it has further surprised to the upside in January. This is primarily driven by higher energy costs that are pushing up prices across many sectors, as well as higher food prices. Inflation is likely to remain elevated for longer than previously expected, but to decline in the course of this year.
So hammering home it's all about inflation, but while the ECB is sticking to its mantra of no rate hikes this year, the Bank of England is taking a different approach. It's the first back-to-back interest rate increases, albeit incremental, since 2004. The Monetary Policy Committee announced another 25 basis point hike, taking the bank rate to 0.5%. The surprise bit, though, that markets weren't expecting was that 4 of the 9 Monetary Policy Committee members, the people who set those rates, they were actually up for a bigger hike to 0.75%. Because everyone's really worried about inflation, with higher energy costs, increased demand and supply chain issues, all driving up consumer prices. Let's talk about energy costs, though, for a moment. We had some news today. UK households, they're facing a record increase in bills of 54%. Now, that's because the regulator has lifted the maximum rate that suppliers can charge. It's the second major increase in energy bills in 6 months, and the largest on record, and that's likely going to drive millions into fuel poverty for the first time. Now, all of that, say business leaders, means it's time to talk about growth. And Tony Danker is the Director General of the Confederation of British Industries.
To be clear, we're not talking about growth by any means. We are talking about the right kind of growth, sustainable long-term growth based on investment, innovation and productivity. Now, it has been the Treasury's job as an institution since the Stone Age to be sceptics of this kind of talk. But economic and fiscal policy are not the same thing. No CEO in this room puts the finance department in charge of sales or lets them alone determine strategy. Companies can't afford not to invest in growth, and nor can countries.
So let's talk growth and everything else with Susanna Streeter, who's a Senior Investment and Markets Analyst at Hargreaves Lansdown. Good to see you again, Susanna. Let's start with Eurozone inflation. Considering the inflation, considering all that tension in Ukraine, might the ECB wobble, do you think, from their position of no change?
Well, actually, I think, if anything, the situation in Ukraine, if it deteriorates, would actually be a pause for thought in terms of lifting rates because of the impact that it could have on the financial markets. But looking at the broader picture and looking at where inflation is, running at 5.1% for the Eurozone, for the first time, Christine Lagarde, the European Central Bank President, has indicated really that inflation is hanging around for a lot longer than was first expected, and it is of increasing concern for ECB policymakers as well. Still holding off any indication of an immediate rise in interest rates. Certainly for now, ECB not moving on that front, but interestingly, didn't rule it out for this year. And certainly if inflation sticks around with energy prices not looking to go down anytime soon, that will be a course of action. It is increasingly concentrating minds at the ECB, and it is looking more likely that a rate rise will be brought in sooner rather than later.
Concentrating minds, but that vote to keep rates on hold was unanimous. Not the same story across the channel, because back in Britain there's a very different response to high inflation, isn't there?
Certainly. The Bank of England really leading the way in terms of hiking rates, and actually there was much more hawkish, more aggressive stance appearing around the table at the Bank of England. Although this rate hike of 2.5% was widely expected, the dissent around the table, the very fact that policymakers, 4 of them, wanted to push rates up even higher to 0.75%, did surprise. And that has led expectations that there will be rapid rate rises in the UK to try and keep a lid on inflation, with forecasts that it's going to rise up to 7.25%. And I think that's why certainly policymakers around the table at the Bank of England are moving much more quickly than they are in the Eurozone, because inflation isn't running quite as hot. But, nonetheless, it is still a worry for central banks around the world, particularly in the Eurozone, the Bank of England, and as we've heard recently, the Federal Reserve which is also expected to raise rates at the March meeting.
Yeah, analysts expecting rate rises around the globe, aren't they? Let's bring it back to the UK, inflation and this cost of living crisis. Many of the headlines are already screaming that it's Black Thursday because now the cost of borrowing is up, but also the cost of our energy bills. I mean, I'm scared to open that envelope. They're saying they're going to go up 54%. That's going to be hot to handle.
Yeah, it's a really perfect storm of rising prices right across the board. We've got the increase in energy costs, which actually the Bank of England said it didn't even factor in its assessment. So, you know, highly likely that actually inflation will even go above 7.25%. And of course, we have now mortgage rates going up because of this increase in interest rates. Plus, we still have shop price inflation rising, so price rises right across the board. And the support that the government is offering really will do little to dent the impact on household bills because it's affecting so many people. And I think that's why you've seen retail stocks, for example, sliding today, the likes of Marks & Spencer, JD Sports, because there is a feeling that actually if the cost of living does increase so much, then people simply won't have as much money to spend on delayable items like furniture, like a new outfit. They'll be ring-fencing those budgets to pay for essential expenditure. And that is the worry. And that is why I think there is an extra amount of nervousness among certain sectors like retail and hospitality, the fear that spending will fall as a result of that.
Susanna Street, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. And Jamie, if you want to keep an eye on your bill, maybe a few more jumpers so you can still buy their cheese and wine.
I'm going to buy another jumper. That's my solution to the international energy crisis. Juliet Mann, thank you very much.
Well, staying with inflation and in Turkey, it surged to a 20-year high. The rate hit 48.7% last month, according to government figures. The cost of household goods was up over 11% in a single month. It comes despite assurances from President Erdogan that the cost of living will fall soon. Turkey's central bank has been pursuing an aggressive rate-cutting policy to boost exports that's seen the lira almost halve in value over the past year.
Well, Russia has sent around 30,000 troops and weapons to Belarus. That's according to NATO. The deployment raises fears in Europe that a Russian military assault on Ukraine might be imminent. The Kremlin has accused Washington of inflaming tensions in the region by sending 3,000 US troops to Eastern Europe. Let's talk to our correspondent, Julia Chapman, in Moscow. Julia, what more can you tell us about this deployment to Belarus?
NATO says that it is the largest deployment of Russian troops to Belarus since the end of the Cold War. For context, last year about 12,500 Russian troops took part in the Zapad 2021 games on Belarusian soil, so certainly a much higher number this time around. These drills were announced last month. Troops have been filtering in over the past few weeks. Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, is in Belarus monitoring the goings-on. The drills appear to have gotten started in full swing a little bit earlier than expected. But certainly this comes at a very tense moment in Europe with fears in the US and the rest of the West that there could be an invasion of Ukraine staged from any angle by Russia, Belarus included. And as you say, it comes as well as NATO is bolstering its own defenses with new US troops. This is what Jens Stoltenberg of NATO had to say earlier.
Yesterday, the US announced that they will deploy additional forces to Germany, Poland and Romania. This is a powerful signal of US commitment and comes on top of other recent US contributions to our shared security, including putting a carrier strike group under NATO command in the Mediterranean and providing 8,500 troops at high readiness for the NATO response force.
Julia, another world leader visiting Ukraine, President Erdogan of Turkey, perhaps hoping to draw attention away from his economic troubles back home.
Yes, certainly. He was in Ukraine to sign a free trade deal with the government there and push ahead with plans to build Turkish drones in Ukraine. Ukraine has bought a number of them and is using them in eastern Ukraine in the conflict with Russian-backed separatists. But Erdogan, of all the NATO members, probably has the closest relationship with Russia. Of course, Turkey has defense contracts with Russia. It has very close energy links. It even has a pipeline that was built from Russia into Turkey, circumventing Ukraine. And Erdogan has put himself forward as a possible mediator between Ukraine and Russia. That has been welcomed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Russia has been a bit more dismissive of that idea, but I think that's mostly because Russia isn't willing to engage directly with Ukraine, although there could be a visit to Turkey by President Putin after the Olympics.
Julia, thanks for that. Julia Chapman, our correspondent in Moscow.
China says it understands Russia's security concerns over the situation in Ukraine. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been meeting his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, who's in Beijing to attend the Winter Olympic Games. The presidents of China and Russia will meet on Friday.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the clock is ticking for TikTok. Under pressure in the US amid reports the Biden administration is looking to target Chinese-owned apps.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center. A modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter on CGTN. See the difference.
This week on Razor, manufacturing mini human hearts, and Neil Cairns meets the Cambridge scientists who are using magic tricks to help test perception in birds.
Corvids use intricate techniques or tactics of perception which resemble some of the tactics that we do.
So they're doing magic with their mates?
They do a slide of beak, if you will.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Social media giant Facebook has seen the number of its users shrink for the first time. Between July and December last year, the company lost nearly 1 million users, ending 17 years of expansion. Joseph Evans is head of technology at research firm Enders Analysis.
The user drop itself is still fairly modest. It comes out as about 0%, so it's pretty flat, but it is technically down on the prior quarter. What's behind it? I mean, this is something that had to happen at some point. Facebook now has monthly active users in the kind of 3 billion range. So it's really going to be pushing the limit of how many people it can reach just in terms of how many online adults there are on the planet. So this had to come at some point. I think a bigger concern than the user growth topping out is this question of where is future revenue growth going to come from? Is Facebook going to be able to continue to capture this enormous profit margin? And how does it deal with the kind of new competition that it's facing?
But do you think this is a one-way movement when it comes to falling users, or can it bounce back?
I think we're likely to see quarter-on-quarter user growth again at some point. Could even be next quarter. But I don't think we're going to see the years of consecutive user growth that we did before. I mean, remember, this is the first drop in users that Facebook has ever experienced in its lifetime as a public company. But we're just reaching a kind of natural ceiling of users, I think, and so we're not going to see this enormous growth. It could go up, it could go down. That's the sort of new world which I think we're looking at.
So the company's betting on the metaverse. Do you think that really is the future?
Maybe in the very far future, that is the future. I think maybe we're all going to spend hours a day in a kind of virtual metaverse. We're going to live there, we're going to work there, we're going to socialize there. But I think that's going to be a year that starts with 2030 or 2040. We're not talking about the next few years. So if Facebook, does have these problems, I don't think that the metaverse is going to save them anytime soon.
And what effect will these numbers have on its rivals, firms like TikTok, for example?
Well, TikTok is growing, extremely quickly, particularly among young users. Here in the UK, among 18 to 24-year-olds, it's already bigger than Facebook or Instagram in terms of time spent. And it's about the same size as both of them put together. So in that smaller, that younger user base, we're already seeing that effect. So there's definitely an opportunity for other companies there. I mean, they offer different sorts of things. Facebook is your classic social network. You go on there because it's where your friends are. Something like TikTok is closer to like a TV channel. It collects this great content which really attracts you. And that's what I think why Facebook finds it so difficult to compete with them, because Facebook has always relied on this wonderful social network which brings all your friends together. But it doesn't matter whether you're connected to your friends on TikTok. It's about the content. And I think that's really the area where Facebook is starting to struggle.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, watching events for us in New York. John, Facebook is for old people and has a massive image problem. How does that translate into numbers?
Well, I tell you, I love Joseph there. Joseph Evans being so diplomatic, Jamie and Robin. So I will be considerably less diplomatic. This is being seen here as a huge shock. And I'll tell you, the company that you know better as Facebook, which is now known as Meta, they've got this metaverse thing going on. That's where they want to be in 15 years' time. It's being called here the metaverse on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Mainly, I will tell you, because the little metaverse division that they have lost $10 billion. I don't know how long you can go on losing $10 billion on an idea that is still 15 years away. Look, the Nasdaq's been very badly hit in New York this morning. It's down 2%. It was down in the futures market last night. Meta is down 24% right now. They made less money than Wall Street have been looking for. That's part of it. They got no new users at all, basically. I mean, you can fiddle the figures a bit, but basically no new users on any of their platforms at all. And that is what is really being seen as shocking. The first time that's happened in 18 years. Daily actives, monthly actives, these are key indicators for Wall Street, which is always looking at future earnings for these big technology companies. That's the thing. The share price is based on what they can do in the future. That's why they don't pay a dividend. Google itself says, look, the ad spend... Facebook itself says the ad spend was down. We face very, very stiff competition from the likes of TikTok. And I did say, mentioning Google there, I did say yesterday in the program that the ad spend had gone to Google. We reported that 24 hours ago. It looks like it's dodged Facebook and its platforms for some other reasons, and also Spotify, which we'll come on to in just a second. I mean, there is, as Joseph was saying, an opportunity for growth here, because the penetration of Facebook and its other sites in emerging markets is very, very low compared to how it is where you are in Europe or certainly here in America. So there's a real opportunity there. But you see, there's a pattern now because Spotify said the same thing, really. Spotify shares were down 29% in the last 24 hours. They're now down 14%. This is the Joe Rogan effect and also the fact that they, too, can't predict how many users they will get in the coming months. And I think part of this also is the end of the pandemic effect. You know, we've all sat on our sofas for the last 2 years and been on Facebook endlessly and watching Netflix and listening to Spotify. And now that is coming to an end. And nobody knows how much of what we've seen in the last 2 years is going to be hung on to. So it's a very interesting situation. And it, I'm afraid, is hobbling the markets here this morning, guys.
John, maybe everyone's back working in the office, flicking through on Facebook, but that's another question. Facebook's blaming TikTok, of course, for the downturn, but it may not have to compete with it much longer, I guess. So what's going on with these foreign apps?
Yeah, the foreign apps. Well, WAPO, which is what we call the Washington Post, is reporting this morning out of Washington that the Biden administration is looking at some kind of restriction or limits on foreign apps operating here. And this is the same thing that we've seen with the China telecom companies, you know, Mobile, Telecom and Unicom. They've all either moved out now or they were delisted from here or they've been accused of spying. And it's the same thing. The American authorities are concerned that these apps in some way are collecting data which in the end ends up in their home countries. Now, there is no real proof of that, but this is what the Commerce Department is particularly worried about, and it is reported by the Washington Post that they may well in the future, if this goes ahead, require these companies like TikTok to actually undertake a data order so that the Commerce Department can see what data has been coming in, where it's come from, and then what they ultimately do with that. Now, the Washington Post also reports that TikTok, which is owned by ByteDance, based in Beijing, has had talks with the Commerce Department recently over this very issue. But the Washington Post also points out that there are very, very many legal hurdles to getting to this point. In other words, it's all very well to say you want to put restrictions on companies like this, but actually getting there is a potential legal forest which will have to be gone through.
John, just a quick word about PayPal, another company having a pretty grim day.
Yes, and pretty much for the same reason as Facebook, really. Yesterday, Wednesday, they lost a quarter of their value, 24%. That's a lot, and it's down 4% as well now. It was co-founded by Elon Musk, who, of course, is the guy behind Tesla at the moment, as we know. Basically, disappointing earnings gave PayPal its worst day ever on the stock market on Wednesday. It's the same sort of stuff. Weak guidance, worries about inflation, supply chain issues, but also, most interestingly, they had to take off 4.5 million accounts, which they call illegitimate. And I guess that means some kind of dodgy dealing. I don't want to say money laundering, but some kind of dodgy dealing. 4.5 million of those have been taken off. And for all those reasons, PayPal being heavily punished right now here in New York, when it was, a couple of months ago, an absolute darling of the stock market.
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. John Terrett, our correspondent in New York.
UK oil and gas company Shell has boosted its dividends and share buybacks after reporting its highest fourth-quarter profits in 8 years. It reported final quarter earnings of $6.4 billion, taking its full-year earnings to more than $19 billion. Shell says it will lift its dividend by 4% and buy back $8.5 billion worth of shares in the first half of this year.
Japan's gaming giant Nintendo has raised its profit forecast for 2022 by 50% based on strong performance by recent game releases. However, the company has cut sales targets for its popular Switch console over global supply chain shortages. Nintendo posted its highest ever annual profit in 2021.
Germany has banned Russia Today's German-language TV channel from broadcasting. It only started operating on December the 16th, but the German regulator says it does not have a valid license. Russia has called the ban politically motivated and ordered the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle to close its Moscow office, revoking accreditation for staff.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, cheerio coronavirus. Are we seeing the end of the pandemic? The World Health Organization makes optimistic noises. Next.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: the Islamic State group's leader is killed after a United States Special Forces raid in Syria. President Joe Biden says he blew himself up and his family members rather than face justice.
A cost of living crisis and soaring energy bills. Now the Bank of England raises interest rates as the UK government intervenes to offset record price hikes.
And investors unfriend Facebook. The social media giant sees its shares plunge over 20% in a single day, one of the biggest drops in the stock's history.
Northern Ireland's First Minister, Paul Givan, has just confirmed his resignation in protest over border checks in the Irish Sea.
Those checks on goods were introduced as part of the Brexit deal's Northern Ireland Protocol in order to enable free trade to continue with the EU's Republic of Ireland.
But that's seen Northern Ireland effectively cut off from the rest of the UK. Let's talk now to our correspondent Trent Murray in Brussels. Hello, Trent. So Northern Ireland's Agriculture Minister has ordered those border checks to end with immediate effect. What's been the EU's response to that?
Well, monitoring the situation on the ground very closely. That was the initial assessment from the European Commission behind me earlier today, as news started to develop overnight that the Agriculture Minister, Edwin Poots, had ordered officials in Northern Ireland to halt those checks on goods coming from the rest of Great Britain. This, of course, has long been one of the most controversial aspects of the Brexit deal struck between the EU and the UK. The main issue being that, of course, Northern Ireland shares a land border with the Republic of Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is still an EU member. Northern Ireland is not, given it's part of the UK. So the EU has long insisted that some form of checks on food and animal products coming into Northern Ireland from the UK needed to be carried out, because in their view, if there were no checks, then that could question the integrity of the single market. But of course, for many people in Northern Ireland, this has been extremely controversial. That is why we have seen, as you just mentioned, really in the last few moments, Paul Givan, the First Minister, resigning over all of this. For what it's worth, the UK government has said to Belfast they need to continue fulfilling the obligations of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but there is real disagreement still between London and Belfast over all of this. The EU, for what it's worth, as part of their assessment today, have also said, and I'm going to quote here, the protocol that we have signed was with the British government, and it is therefore up to the British government to ensure the fulfilment of the agreement. So in other words, saying you signed it, you bought it. We know London really doesn't like this either, but for the moment they are trying to stick to it, knowing that it is a key sticking point with the EU.
And Trent, what could the consequences of this resignation be?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost it does upend Northern Irish politics in many ways. It is an incredibly sensitive area of British politics, given the historical sensitivities around peace in Northern Ireland, around what unionist communities want, around what nationalists want. So I think the first reaction you will see is really the election campaign which is taking place there being somewhat upended. I think more pressingly in the longer term, it does just once again continue to really strain the relations between Brussels and the UK, because Brussels really is digging its heels in here, saying this is the agreement that was signed, this is it, we're not going to revisit it. But London does keep pressing over this. They do want to see the protocol changed in some way, because in their view it's not working. In fact, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, today said that he thought a sensible solution needs to be found, because in his words it's crazy to have checks on goods that are basically circulating within the single market of the UK. It is complicated stuff. Certainly the legal text on all of this is complicated, but at the heart of it, what you are seeing is just that continual tension, really, between the UK and the EU as this kind of messy divorce settlement still continues post-Brexit.
Trent, thanks very much indeed. Trent Murray there in Brussels.
Now, are we seeing the end of the pandemic? Europe is entering a plausible endgame. That's according to the World Health Organization.
As a number of countries end their COVID-19 restrictions, the organization's European director says high vaccination rates and the reduced severity of the Omicron variant have changed the outlook.
This context that we have not experienced so far in this pandemic leaves us with the possibility for a long period of tranquility and a much higher level of population defense against any resurge in transmission, even with a more virulent variant. This period of higher protection should be seen as a ceasefire that could bring us enduring peace.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ryan Thompson following the story in Paris. Ryan, tell us more about what the World Health Organization has to say.
Hi there, Jimmy. Well, you know, it's funny, for so many months now, actually 2 years, whenever we've talked about these World Health Organization meetings not far from here in Geneva, it's been bad news after bad news, warnings from them about the state of the pandemic and what lies ahead. This is the first time in a long time that we've actually had a piece of good news that maybe the end of this pandemic, or at least a much more manageable position, could be lying ahead. The director for Europe of the World Health Organization, Hans Kluge, has said that we are basically at a crossroads right now, and that a ceasefire, if you look at the pandemic in terms of war terms, could be just right around the corner. And the reason for that is because with the arrival of the Omicron variant, well, so many people have been infected but actually had quite mild cases that it's given Europeans as a whole a huge degree of immunity, whether they've gotten that immunity through vaccination with quite high vaccination rates across the continent, or by catching the virus through the Omicron variant and have quite mild cases.
I mean, all of this despite record cases across Europe in the past week. I mean, eyebrows will be raised at the WHO's optimism. What's prompted that change of message?
Well, the World Health Organization is not alone in making this optimistic stance. We've heard similar messages just a few days ago from the French government as they eased restrictions across the country here. The idea is that, yes, cases are surging. If you take a country like France, for example, you're looking at, on average, upwards of 400,000 infections per day. But the important metric is looking at those intensive care units and those deaths. And those have really come to a point of plateauing where, yes, there are many people in intensive care, but it is not seeing the same burden and surge that we've seen during previous waves. So basically, we are reaching this point where things can potentially be looked at as endemic because they're much more manageable. It all stems to the fact that, yes, Europeans generally have a high vaccination rate. So when they get infected with Omicron cases from COVID-19, they aren't having severe symptoms. Overall, there's also much more manageable conditions in place. But another point that's been pointed out by some experts looking at the hard data is the fact that while Omicron is more transmissible and more people are catching this version and this variant of COVID-19, it's also put Delta variant, which we know is much more severe in most cases, in a corner. And so we've seen those Delta cases diminish more and more over time. While Omicron seems to have peaked in a lot of areas, it's the perfect combination to potentially reach a much more positive outlook as we head into the springtime.
Ryan, thanks for that. Ryan Thompson, our correspondent in Paris.
New Zealand says it will reopen its borders, which have largely been closed for 2 years due to the pandemic. Mandatory hotel quarantine will end for all fully vaccinated New Zealand citizens by March. Tourists from Australia and other visa-free countries will be allowed in by July, and travellers from the rest of the world from October. All arrivals will still be required to self-isolate for 10 days.
Indonesia's main holiday island of Bali has welcomed its first international tourists in almost 2 years. The island officially reopened to visitors from some countries last October, but no flights have been available until now. Strict quarantine requirements remain, even for vaccinated travellers, and Thursday's flight from Tokyo was carrying only 6 passengers.
Serbia's president has praised tennis star Novak Djokovic, saying he put up a great fight in his deportation row with Australia over COVID-19 entry rules. The world #1's visa was cancelled last month, forcing him to miss the Australian Open. State prosecutors in Serbia have rejected claims that Djokovic submitted false coronavirus tests to enter Australia.
UK fighter jets have intercepted unidentified aircraft for the second day in a row. The Royal Air Force confirmed it engaged an aircraft approaching what it called a UK area of interest. This comes a day after jets were scrambled from a Scottish military air base against 4 unidentified aircraft. It's understood none of the planes targeted entered UK airspace.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the Olympic torch relay reaches the Great Wall of China, with the countdown to the opening ceremony less than 24 hours away.
This is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas.
So it's all begun now. Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
In less than 24 hours, Beijing's Winter Games will begin. China's President Xi Jinping told the International Olympic Committee that his country is ready.
The organisation's president, Thomas Bach, commended Beijing's preparation, saying history will be made as the Chinese capital hosts the Games for the second time.
China has already made history by surpassing the goal of engaging 300 million Chinese people with sport on snow and ice. Today, we can say China is a winter sport country. I can only reiterate my heartfelt congratulations to our Chinese partners and friends on this extraordinary achievement. It will change the landscape of winter sport around the world forever.
Well, the Olympic flame has arrived at the most iconic of all locations in China, the Great Wall. Famous Chinese athletes acted as torchbearers, which will eventually reach Beijing's Bird Nest Stadium for the opening ceremony on Friday. Our correspondent, Lucia Ray, reports.
At 9 o'clock in the morning, the torch was carried to the Badaling section of the Great Wall. Torchbearers were welcomed by exciting crowds who gathered to witness the event in -14 degrees.
The Winter Olympics is, in fact, a grand event that China has been looking forward to for a long time. Not only do I look forward to the events, but also to all the fans and athletes. As a summer Olympian, I want to put in my own efforts to help with the hosting of the Winter Games. I am very happy to be involved in it.
The Badaling is the most prominent section of the Great Wall built during the Ming Dynasty. It was once the first line of defense on the main pass between Beijing and the Mongol tribes north of the Great Wall. A powerful moment to witness these two symbols joining each other.
In the summer of 2008, I also participated in the torch relay. But this time, I'm here as a representative of the sports industry. China's ice and snow sports developed from scratch. They've already made a big transformation. I'm happy and proud of such developments.
Officials say around 1,200 torchbearers are expected to join the relay. The torch will be passed along 11 areas outside the closed loop and 1 area inside. Unlike the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics, the relay route for the Winter Olympic Game is planned to be far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It's to avoid affecting residents' life during the pandemic. The cheering crowds later said they understand it's a huge challenge to host such big event at this particular time. And they said they will cooperate and abide the rules and regulations to help China be a successful host of the 2022 Winter Olympic Games. Lucia, CGTN, Beijing.
So let's talk shopping. And it's a bonanza couple of weeks as millions of Chinese celebrate New Year and stock up on presents for loved ones.
Our correspondent, Naweed Jabarkal, reports.
Milan, Paris, London. When it comes to luxury fashion, nowhere does it like Europe. Now more than ever, big brands here are targeting one major market, China. It's where 1/5 of all global spending on luxury goods took place last year, and consultants Bain & Company predict the market will overtake the US as the world's biggest for high-end products by 2025.
So previously, it's like we are trying to place in these, luxury brands. We want to have them. We want to show the logos outside when we wear the outfits and when we carry the bags. Now they have the right to say, I want to select which brand fits me better. And we can see these, trend increasingly in the tier 1 cities, big cities in China.
There's one event in particular that brands here are increasingly eyeing, Chinese New Year. The huge festivities mean plenty of spending. Brands like Salvatore Ferragamo at its store in London's Westfield are among those looking to capitalise. It's worked with local Chinese artists on designs inspired by the Year of the Tiger.
I've walked around this shopping centre, which is one of Europe's largest, and spoken to at least half a dozen luxury brands with some sort of nod to the Chinese New Year. But it's not just about physical retail anymore. In the digital age of social media, getting marketing right is a big challenge, especially when the stakes are so high.
A number of international brands have felt the wrath of Chinese netizens and consumers in recent years. Some have apologised after wading in on political issues, while others have been forced to backtrack over advertising that seemed insensitive or racist. Chinese consumers have been criticised as being too sensitive, but Professor Wang says often the mistakes are down to a lack of cultural understanding, and even the big names are now adapting to local customs.
Previously, like these, the luxury brands, they were reluctant to actually sell their latest items online because they feel that it's not appropriate for the brand image. But over the time, you can see, especially in this year, you can see the first release of certain limited version items. They are released online in China.
COVID-19 and travel restrictions meant last year more than 90% of all Chinese spending on luxury goods was inside China. So for Europe's fashion houses, getting used to local culture might make sense. Louis Barkil, CGTN, London.
San Francisco is home to one of the largest Chinese communities in the United States. Celebrations to mark the Year of the Tiger have been taking place, in sharp contrast to scenes a year ago when nearly all the city's major events were cancelled. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
In San Francisco, Chinese New Year celebrations take place at Chase Center, the home of the Golden State Warriors basketball team.
Cherish the small moments you have with your family and the small moments you have of good health and happiness.
Businesses in San Francisco's Chinatown have been hit hard during the COVID pandemic, but during the holidays, people came out to show their support.
The crowded streets behind me are part of what's known as the Lunar New Year Flower Market. It's truly a sight for sore eyes. Last year, it was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is one of the happiest days of my life because I've been doing the street fairs since 1991, and the past 2 years has been terrible because virtual isn't the same. But this morning I woke up, I said, I wonder if it'll be crowded like it normally is, and it is.
Also missing last year, the Chinese New Year Parade. It's the biggest parade celebrating the Lunar New Year outside of Asia. This year, it's making a comeback on February 19th.
It's been an overwhelming response from the community, from the public, from our attendees to actually have something that everyone can actually come together and celebrate. We have to be realistic that the pandemic still exists, and we're trying to be very cautious in holding these events so that everyone can enjoy. So as part of our health and safety protocols, we're asking all of our volunteers to be fully vaccinated and boosted. We're asking everyone to wear masks.
In Portsmouth Square, the heart of San Francisco Chinatown, lion dancing turned tiger dancing. Local politicians called for vigilance and solidarity.
Our community has struggled during this pandemic, during this recession, during anti-Asian hate, but we are here because the sun is shining, the tiger is going to roar, Chinatown is coming back.
Let's fight AAPI hate. Let's fight Asian hate with the ferociousness of a tiger.
The god of wealth, or Choi Sun, also made his presence felt. Adults and children lined up to receive Lycee red packets filled with bills and chocolate coins.
Happy New Year, Tiger.
Happy New Year! Happy New Year, Tiger! Wish everyone healthy and happy.
As the community strives to get back on its feet, some leaders say there's one trait of the tiger that's needed now more than ever: resilience. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
The headlines again. The Islamic State group's leader has been killed after a United States Special Forces raid in Syria. President Joe Biden says he blew himself up, and his family members too, when he was surrounded rather than face justice.
A cost of living crisis and soaring energy bills. The Bank of England raises interest rates as the UK government intervenes to offset record price hikes.
And investors unfriend Facebook. The social media giant sees its shares plunge over 20% in a single day, one of the biggest drops in the stock's history.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.